look, it's what these guys are doing. And when I say these guys, I mean all the Democratic Socialist types, the Bernie Sanders, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes, is they're being outrageously dishonest in how they sell all of their ideas. It's really just, it's unbelievable.
Well, just the fact that they're pretending like any of it's a good idea.
Well, there's that. Well, right, you could look at that.
It's all just bad ideas.
That is certainly true. But also, I mean, look, Bernie Sanders is a guy who I believe he has 3 homes. He made over $1 million.
And he fucked over that college. All of his talk about education.
You know, it's like, it's kind of, it starts to make you a little bit suspicious of somebody who's so against income inequality, so against capitalism, but yet he can make hundreds of thousands and even over $1 million in 1 year and give very little money to charity. He also maximized his deductions and paid something like 15-16% in income tax. So for this guy who's all like, oh, the wealthy got to pay their fair share, it's like, all right, bro, well, you could lead by example. But he doesn't seem to be interested in that. There's something particularly interesting about a guy who makes $1 million off a book about how evil capitalism is.
And then gives none of it to charity.
Yeah.
Did you see there was this AOC article about she's moving into this luxury high-rise building?
Yeah, I did see that.
And then, but here's the best part. So they gave her shit for it, and a rep responded, it's not hypocritical in the same way she has the Green Deal, and she still drives a combustion car.
It's not hypocritical.
No, that was her example for why it wasn't. No, that's also hypocritical, you fucking retards. Like, that's the whole point, is that you're out preaching lunacy that you never want to put into practice as if everyone should be doing it.
She is. I'll tell you, though, there's something amazing about her. It's like, it really is. I know we compared her to Trump a lot, but she is almost like the equal opposite of Trump.
She's dumb.
But it's not just the dumb. She is dumb and completely self-assured.
Yeah.
There's an amazing mix to that.
Just wait till her tits sag. She's going to be over in a couple of years.
Yeah, but she'll still feel great about it. I mean, she is like she is so convinced that she knows what she's talking about. She's like a cartoon. And that's what the Trump thing is. He's like a cartoon. You ever see those clips of Trump when he's talking about how he knows more than anybody else?
I know a tremendous
and it's like
amount.
all the
No one ever knew more.
But it's all the different things. He goes, look, I know the military probably better than anybody. And then he's like, look, I know banking probably better than anybody. He's like, I know building better than anybody. It's just from different speeches. But he just quite often says that he knows something better than everybody. And it's so absurd and cartoonish. But Donald Trump, I mean, if he took a lie detector test, I think he'd pass every single time. And I think AOC is the same way. Like, she is completely self-assured that she knows everything she's talking. This moron said when she helped chase Bezos out of New York City, or chase him away from coming, she said that's $3 billion now that we can spend on housing and education and taking care of our people. This bitch doesn't know the difference between a tax credit and a subsidy. What the how economically illiterate, and economics are your thing. Like, that's what you fucking run on, basically, is all these economic issues. And yet you don't know the difference between a tax credit and a fucking subsidy. Which, by the way, a lot of people fucking confuse. And a tax credit is not a subsidy. If I say, hey, move to my city and I'll steal 10% less of your shit, that's a very different thing than saying, move to my city and I'll steal 10% of this guy's shit and give it to you. It's a very different thing.
I love how she celebrated that like it was a victory over Amazon. The working victory, the workers were able to, yeah.
Just to break this down for anybody who's not like, you know, like into economics and following what I'm saying, just imagine, take money out of the equation, right? Because all money really is something that, as if you want to learn about this, read some Murray Rothbard, but it's something that money developed organically in the market as a medium of exchange, because trading is kind of difficult if you always have to trade the thing that someone else wants. So if I you know, like, am a farmer and Rob, you know, I don't know, is like a shoemaker or something like that, and at one point I'm like, hey, I'll trade you some eggs for shoes or something. It's like, okay, and I give him eggs for shoes, but then I'm like, oh, I need shoes for my wife too. Here's some more eggs. And he's like, well, I'm kind of good on eggs. And you're like, okay, but all I make is eggs. And he's like, well, all I make is shoes, and but I don't need eggs. Then you're like, oh, okay, what do you need? And he needs wood. And it's like, now I got to go find someone who has wood and needs eggs. And it's much easier if we just have a store of value that we can all use to trade. And basically everyone accepts that this is what. So anyway, that's how money comes from. But just take money out of it for a second and just think about the producing of things. And this, by the way, goes right to like why taxation is theft and all of that shit. When it's money, it gets a little bit more confusing, but just think of it as the actual production. Just think of Rob as making shoes all day, and you sit there with your hands and you make fucking shoes. Like, this is old timey. We don't have machines or Chinese kids. It's just a white guy, just a white guy making shoes by hand. Okay?
Real old timey.
Old timey, before China was invented 20 years ago.
Do I look like a sexy blacksmith in this? Am I like on top of something, hammering away?
Every now and then, like your wife who like comes in and she's
I'm like,
get
the fuck out of here.
Yeah, she's like, it's time for supper, and you're like, quiet, woman, and she walks away with her head down. Yeah, it was a good time.
And I drink on the job for sure.
Yeah, it's almost required.
Yes.
Rob, you drink on the job. You're drinking on the job right now.
That's right.
You do drink on your job. Okay, so yeah. But so you're making your fucking shoes, and then the government comes along. Let's say you whatever, they usually take 20% of whatever you produce. That's the government tax, right? Like if you make 100 shoes, they're going to come take 20 shoes and give it out as they see fit. And then they go, hey, you're like, I'm going to leave. I'm going to make shoes somewhere else because this is crazy. And they go, hey, if you stay, we'll only take 10 shoes we'll only steal 10 shoes at the threat of putting you in jail. And you go, oh, okay, I'll stay, right? All right. So that would be a tax credit. A subsidy would be like, hey, if you stay, we'll give you some eggs that we stole from Dave. That's a fucking subsidy. They're very different things. So what Ocasio-Cortez in this leftist mind, this is like when they say like all these things like we subsidize the oil companies. It's like, no, actually we give them tax credits. A different fucking thing. And they mix those up all the time, I think intentionally. And I remember Ron Paul explaining this to Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks like years ago. And he was like, well, I look at the tax credits and subsidies as very different things. And Cenk Uygur was like, okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. You're like, yeah, because they're very different things. But this is how dumb AOC is so she goes, so basically they were going to give Jeff Bezos, like, what was it, $3 billion or $5 billion in tax credits. So they'd be like, hey, if you come to New York, I know what you're thinking. We have really high state income taxes. But if you bring all of these jobs, if you bring 25,000 good paying jobs, and we're talking about like $125,000 a year jobs, right? Like all coming into New York, right? If you bring those here, we'll give you some tax credits so you don't have to pay as much taxes. And it's going to be like $3 billion. And then he's like, no, sorry, not coming now. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez goes, well, that's $3 billion we can spend on schools. It's like, no, now you have nothing. You have nothing. It's like, imagine if I went to you, right? So Rob's making shoes, and the plan was to take 20 shoes, out of the 100, 20% of his shoes. And now we're like, oh, no, we'll lower it to 10% of your shoes. So the way Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is looking at that is, we just gave you 10% of the people's shoes. But of course they're not. They were yours. You're the one who made them. But it's like, oh, so instead of 20%, it's 10% now. So we just gave you a 10% subsidy is the way she's looking at it. So Rob goes, okay, great. I'm leaving. I'm not making shoes here anymore. I'm going to a neighboring state. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez goes, great. Those are 10 pairs of shoes we can give out to kids now. It's like, no. There are no shoes. There are no shoes.
You're not
the guy
this.
making shoes is gone. He's gone. He's making shoes somewhere else. Other people get those 10 shoes. By the way, you were going to get a lot more than 10 shoes. You were going to get 100 shoes put into your fucking area. All those shoes were going to be sold. What do you think all of those thousands of people who were fucking coming here, who were making six figures, where were they going to shop? Where were they going to live? It was all going to be in New York. It would have been a tremendous amount of wealth coming into the city. Like, yeah, okay. There would have been some issues with like fucking, I don't know, upward pressure on housing or, like public transportation or some other shit. But okay, it would have been worth it. And it's fucking hilarious. By the way, there obviously are problems with, there's something fucked up about giving somebody a tax, break for coming in while small businesses have to pay these crazy high tax rates. Okay, that's fucked up. But the fucked up part is that you're raping the small businesses, not that you're giving big business a break. Anyway, they're just so dishonest. And it's And this is what I was getting into, like the dishonesty about Bernie Sanders. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in that situation, I don't even think was being dishonest. I think she was just really, really stupid. But when it comes to things like...
On that note, isn't it insane that for the most part, what she's saying just gets reported as fact? It's not like, hey, listen to this backwards bullshit crazy thing that this misguided person said. It's like, in response to Amazon leaving, here's the flip side of it. No, here's fucking nonsense that you should be calling nonsense. Like,
yeah, well, there is something about like all these fucking power-hungry statists, they have a certain interest in blurring the line between tax credits and subsidies to begin with. So I think they don't particularly like to call out the difference between that. Because there is this thing... There's like this kind of assumption in that when you give someone a tax credit and say that's our money, there's something really like, it's very subtle, but there's something really powerful about that. So if I go, if I'm paying 20% in taxes and then I go down to paying 10% in taxes, you're like, this guy just took 10% of the public's money. It's like, oof, that's really interesting. So basically the assumption there is that the government owns all your shit, and you're lucky you get to keep a certain percentage of it, which basically is the theory of the income tax to begin with. I mean, if there is an income tax, right? If the income tax is 1%, Ron Paul used to say this, he'd go, if you give up 1% of the tax, you give up 100% of the principal. But if you're saying that the income tax is 1%, what you're conceding in that is that the government does have a right to take your money. It's 1% because that's what they decided. If they were to decide 2%, it would be 2%. But you've already conceded that they do have a right to come take your fucking money by force from you. So basically, everything you do is the fucking government's. And then you think about it like that money is just a fucking store of value. It's just something that helps us trade. It facilitates trade. Then basically it's your life. It's what you do, your time, your energy. And this is why taxation is akin to slavery.